prior to that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so anyways, now we are at 2025. Yeah, Greenland. Jump into that. Total mood shift.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk Greenland.
Yeah. Strategically, how does it? I mean, Hawaii was the last state, correct? Or Hawaii in 1954 or something like that.
Yeah. Was it 54? It's close enough, anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, that we probably would not make Greenland a state.
No.
Let's keep in mind we have other like Puerto Rico has a lot more people in it than Greenland, and Puerto Rico's not a state.
Yeah.
Guam isn't a state. Mm-hmm. The Northern Mariana Islands aren't a state.
Yeah.
And certainly, Baker Island is not a state, but they have a population of 0, so that would. But Greenland has about 50,000 people, and they have natural resources, and they're strategically located between us and Russia. And so there's been conversation dating back to the 1800s on whether or not the United States should acquire Greenland.
Which is funny that everyone's talking about it now, but it's if you're a history buff,
it's actually come and gone as a point of discussion several times.
I mean, that's funny because, like you said, it's like one of those things where no one talks about it until it becomes a thing. And
Trump even talked about it like 6 or 7 years ago in his first term. He talked about it and people mocked him.
Yeah.
But it's been a regular point off and on in conversation. This kind of returns us to what we had started off with, like the different types of conservatism, where most people, whether you're Democrats or Republicans these days, have a very conservative attitude of like, well, we just don't want things to change. And I really recommend, if you haven't watched it, watch the first 10 minutes of Marco Rubio's confirmation hearing. Okay. You don't have to watch the whole 4 or 5 hours or whatever it is, but his opening remarks is like a 10-minute speech he gives.
Yeah.
And he really explains the change that needs to take place in U.S. foreign policy, basically in these terms of like, he doesn't say we need to abandon the conservative mindset because that would be too politically loaded. But he says that the end of history model that we've been operating under is wrong and we need to get away from that. And so when we talk about Greenland, for the basically since the end of the Cold War, the U.S. has had the mentality that we've reached the end of history. There is no more conflict. Borders are all settled. We're just going to be in this status quo position where the United States is at the top of the food pyramid and top of the food chain, and everybody else is sort of happy with where they're at. Well, obviously the Chinese aren't happy with that. Obviously the Russians aren't happy with that. The Indians aren't happy with that. Like other countries are not satisfied. Europe's given up all hope of ever achieving anything. Clearly they've just given up. But most countries haven't, and we've become complacent. And so when I look at Greenland, my concerns are this. I'm less concerned about Russia than I am a Greenland alignment towards China. So the threat there is really, whether it be Russia or China, that Greenland, which is currently led by a socialist prime minister who is also the leader of the Independence Party. They want Greenland's independence. If he is able to get more support from Russia and or China, that creates the potential of an independent Greenland aligned with adversaries of the United States. And especially when it comes to China. I think China's looking at our playbook from the Cold War. What was the U.S. strategy during the Cold War? Containment. The idea was we would keep the communist countries contained, we would prevent the spread of communism into other surrounding countries, and eventually we managed to triangulate relations with China and Russia so we could play Russia and China off each other, thus splitting the two primary communist countries. Ultimately, the Soviet Union fell apart, and China started to adopt sort of economic reforms, and then they pulled back on that, and we don't need to get into all of that right now. The point is, I think China is looking at, how successful the U.S. was in destroying the Soviet Union. And I don't think it's a coincidence that China's Belt and Road Initiative has really surrounded Europe and started to infiltrate Europe. I don't think it's a coincidence that China is taking over the Panama Canal. And I don't think that it's a good idea to allow the Chinese to be more supportive of an independent Greenland movement than we are. So what I would like to see is the United States find a way to cooperate with the government of Greenland to pursue our mutual interests, regardless of Denmark's opinion on it. So yeah.
And so what is do you know much about the Greenland, say not the economy but the politics of it? Like, do they want to be independent? Do they want
Yes.
do they want to be part of Denmark? Do they, like
No, they have a very healthy independence movement. They
Okay.
don't want to be a part of, and which also kind of echoes Panama. 120 years ago when or 140 years ago when we supported the Panamanian rebels against the Nicaraguans to gain their own independence. And so Denmark overwhelmingly wants independence. Or maybe I shouldn't say overwhelmingly. I don't know, but it's the most popular parties in Denmark are the independence parties. So most people in Denmark want most people in Greenland want independence from Denmark, and you can understand why. I mean, it's
because they don't want to be they don't want to be like, well, we don't want to get bought up either by the U.S. Like they want to be their own country.
Yeah,
yeah,
and there's going to be very different interests between the Danish and Greenlanders, and just by nature of environment and distance.
But I mean, you think about that; it's pretty advantageous though too. Because here's the thing: there's also that sentiment down in Puerto Rico. Like Puerto Ricans are their own, they aren't, it's weird because they're a U.S. territory.
Right.
They are their own country per se to a certain extent, but like socially, like when people are like, oh, I'm from Puerto Rico, like you still think Puerto Rico's like its own country.
But they're U.S. citizens.
But they're U.S. citizens and they're U.S. territory. They have a lot of the benefits.
So they are part of our country, but they're not they're not a state.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
But I'm saying is there's a lot of benefits to that and almost more than cons, honestly. Like that's the best place to be. Like, you still get to have your own elections. You still but you get all the benefits of the federal government coming in. You got good roads. You got everything's well maintained. And
a lot of garbage though. They haven't quite figured that one out.
True. Yeah. But
you know what? If we can annex Greenland, we can send all the trash there. Yeah. They got the space for it.
They got But that's what I'm saying is I think Puerto Rico. You kind of think that they're divided, because there's not a movement there, but there's always this sentiment of we should be our own country. Yeah. But the life is so good now that they, because my brother-in-law is Puerto Rican, or his dad is from Puerto Rico, and so it's very much because I asked him about that. I was like, so what do they think? What do Puerto Ricans think? He's like, well, it's basically kind of like a double-edged sword. They're they want their independence, but if you do that now, it's chaos, and and it's look at every other Central American country. You want to go to that? Even the good ones.
I want to go to Argentina at this point. Yeah. I'd take Javier Milei over.
Oh yeah, that's true. But I'm saying but even then though, you have the security of the United States, you have all the benefits, and now take all that away, and then you guys are an island nation. So how many factions are you going to split up to? And it's going to cause chaos. There's going to be bloodshed. There's going to be revolution. There's going to be a civil war most likely because people are going to fight over who's going to be in power. It's not a peaceful transition to be all right, well, everything's good. We're just going to accept our,
I've talked to at national conventions of national political conventions. I've talked to the Puerto Rican delegates who attend sometimes. And I've asked them, so what is politics like in Puerto Rico? Yeah. Because they still have the Democrat and Republican parties
they do.
in Puerto Rico. Yeah. But he said that basically the issue that everything organizes around is statehood versus independence. That is what people are thinking in terms of. It's the major dividing issue of people. Probably similar to the way abortion is in the rest of the United States, where it's we talk about taxes and we talk about tariffs and we talk about foreign intervention, but really, if you drill most people down to it, you probably 80 to 90% of people pick their political party based on their stance on life, whether they want to admit it or not.
So that's what I'm saying. I think Greenland, that's a pretty nice offer. Even in the independent Greenlands, you'd be look, become a U.S. territory. We're not commies. We're not Chinese.
Well, that's the problem. Greenland are though.
What's that? Are they commies?
Greenland are very far left.
Oh, okay.
So that was just another reason why I think we should probably be more concerned about Chinese cooperation with Greenlanders than Russians. Okay. And I have no direct knowledge of Chinese courting that relationship, but it seems to me that that's the most natural philosophical alignment. Yeah. And again, looking at China really forming the relationships to surround the United States and cut us off from other allies, it's a natural move. So yeah.
All right, so we take Greenland then.
Yeah, well, that was something that was so funny in the Pete Hegseth hearing when Mazie Hirono asked him, "Would you, if the president ordered you to invade Greenland, would you do it?" And Pete Hegseth started answering, "Well, he was elected by 74 million Americans, and she says, well, I don't care who was elected or what. I want to know if you would do. And I'm like, well, you don't care who was elected? That's the whole point of the election, is how we determine who our leaders are. So will you want the president to order an invasion of a foreign country and his own Secretary of Defense just says no? I mean, don't you want democratic accountability? I thought that's what the January 6th was so bad about, was that it was going to be the end of democracy. So
That's pretty wild, though. So then they're much more warm to China, but are you saying?
I don't know. I'm just saying ideologically they're more aligned with China than with the United States. So
there's not many of them. It's like 50-some thousand.
It's like 50,000 or something.
Yeah. Which is, like I said, I think when people talk about, like, they're like, oh, Iceland, but they're much more socialist, but also like their natural location also makes them be able to be socialists. When they're like, oh yeah, well, we have unlimited volcanic energy that we don't charge for anything for heat. I'm like, well, we all don't live under volcanoes, on top of volcanoes. Like Minnesota's not on top of a volcano, therefore we have to pay
limited
for
geothermal opportunities.
Exactly. It means we have to pay for things, which means capitalism, which means and so I think when Iceland's like that, and they're small, and they're like, well, we don't need much. Well, it's like, yeah, because we would conquer you in a day.
And think about that. Think about that too with Greenland. Is if we decided to invade, or if any country decided to invade, what would they do to stop them?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got 50,000 people. I mean, like, you're not going to be able to stand up to. Sweden could probably take you over if they wanted to. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing you could do to resist.
Yeah.
It's funny. The amount of outrage over those comments, both about Greenland and about Panama.
Yeah.
And I was listening to one commentator who said, I can't believe Trump would say this. It's like, he doesn't, I lived through the Cold War. Doesn't he know that, like, you can't just talk about overthrowing allied governments? Like, we literally invaded Panama in 1989. Like, it has precedent during the Cold War.
Yeah. So, I agree. Now, not only Panama, it was Grenada.
And Grenada.
Yeah. Very short wars.
Yeah.
2 weeks, but still very significant. Yeah. No, I agree.
And Noriega had been a U.S. able before we removed him.
Yeah.
And we put him in, I think, a prison in Florida where he eventually died.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's this sort of like, I'm not the one who forgot the Cold War.